You're listening to the podcast for all of the news, notes, and breakdowns for your Ohio State Buckeyes. This is Sons of the Shoe with Nick Wilson and Spencer German.
Hey, Buckeye fans, Nick Wilson, Spencer German, Sons of the Shoe. We ride again. As always, make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, the free Odyssey app, 923thefan.com. Don't forget to follow 923 The Fan YouTube channel. Please make sure to leave your comments as well. We love reading your comments. You'll also see both of us in the mentions going back and forth. We love a little bit of debate there. But big show for today. Not sure if you've heard about this, if you've seen about this, if you heard about this. Jim Harbaugh is no longer at Michigan. Michigan has a new coach. Sherrone Moore officially takes over. And welcome in, Spencer German. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you too, Nick. It's been a bit. Obviously, I had to finish the show on Tuesday solo. I missed you, but I thought our conversation with Raymond Harper was awesome. I thought he had some really good things to say, especially kind of just exploring Ohio State embracing, if you will, this new era of college football. So I'm glad to be back with you, man.
You know the amount of questions I got at Roman Harper's name that he submitted there, which I think was like Romeo Gonzalez or Romeo Gutierrez.
That's right. It was Romeo
and it threw everyone off, which only made it funnier. Like that kind of stuff, like the fact that people thought we brought on somebody masquerading as Roman Harper and that was his real name in there only made it funnier to me. But Roman was fantastic. We've been talking about it all week. Some of the things that he said, there were some Browns fans not too happy because he had said Caleb Downs is going to be the highest drafted Buckeyes defensive back ever. Yeah. A little known fact, Denzel Ward went fourth to the Browns back in 2018. So it was funny to watch some of because Roman likes to throw his little jabs there. He threw a couple jabs in it. he equally Ohio State fans of the station loved it. And also we're like, bleep that guy. And that's right the place where I want our guest to be.
I think one of my favorite ones, and actually it was in the clip that we shared. He kind of mentioned, and hey, he's coming to Ohio State courtesy of Alabama. So you're welcome. Like it was like him. We had him to thank for this. It was awesome. I loved it. It was great.
So the big news of the week, obviously, is Jim Harbaugh has finally made his decision. I want to start here. I thought Harbaugh played the situation post-national championship as well as you possibly could. I think he had perfectly leveraged Michigan to get every single thing, including some sort of immunity from getting fired from the Stallion stuff and the scandal stuff. I thought he leveraged Michigan beautifully, that if he had gone back to Michigan, he would have gotten everything he wanted. And I also think he was leveraging, or his agent was leveraging the Michigan position to get everything he wanted with the Chargers, which I think, if you're going to go back to the NFL, I just think it's really kind of interesting that a year ago, Jim Harbaugh was cold calling. He was a telemarketer on his own behalf, trying to get teams to interview him. And that's how things kind of transpired with Minnesota and the job that went to Kevin O'Connell 2 years ago now, I guess. And now here, a year later, after really getting no interest last year, all of a sudden he's able to leverage what is a pretty good job walking into with Justin Herbert, where the number one question on every roster in the NFL is already answered for you with having a quarterback like that.
I think you're right that he leveraged the situation perfectly. I kind of look back at like three key moments for me that made me feel like this was, I guess four, that really made me feel like this was going to be the year that he actually made that leap back to the NFL. The first thing I think was just twofold. You start the season with the suspension that he had for the cheeseburgers, that he bought the recruits and all this different stuff. And that was it's
not about the cheeseburgers. It's about the lying.
Well, yeah, the lying, but regardless, that was the first thing. You couple that then with the eventual suspension that he served for the Connor Stallion situation. And that to me was like red flag number one. This guy has to be so fed up with the NCAA just riding his ass every single year for something just because they don't like Jim Harbaugh and somebody's out to get him and they're trying to run him out of this league or whatever. So that was the first thing. The second thing was when Don Yee was brought on at his agent, and I might have these out of order, but he brings in Don Yee to be his agent. You don't bring in Don Yee to be your agent unless you're looking to go make that leap to the NFL. The third thing was the fact that there was these reports that there was a deal on the table. And like to your point, Michigan was ready to give him the moon and the stars and the sky and everything to keep him at Michigan. But there was one stipulation that he wasn't allowed to pursue an NFL job this cycle. And the fact that there was all these reports that he was kind of like, you know what, I'm going to leave it on the corner of my desk and I might come back to it later. That kind of told me all I needed to know. And then to me, like the last straw really was him winning the national championship because I like to your point, he was cold calling NFL teams a year ago to try to make that leap. He was like, oh, you want me for these reasons. To win the national championship was like the full circle of, okay, now we can't ignore this guy anymore. Like it went from him having a cold call to now there's actually a market for this guy. Okay, he's proven that he can still do this thing. He's proven he can still win at this level. Let's bring him back to the NFL where he also proved that he can win. And he accomplished the greatest thing you can in college football. So, yeah, let's do it. So I think it was kind of like a slow rolling progression of things. There was like little dominoes. There were breadcrumbs that fell on the way. But it made total sense. And I'm not surprised that he used what was kind of coming his way at Michigan to his advantage, and it works out where he goes back to the NFL. To your point, maybe the best job this cycle because of the fact that they have the quarterback situation figured out.
Well, and there are two responses from Ohio State fans that I've seen that I either really like or really drive me crazy. The first one, and I want to get your take on it, was, oh, now I can like Harbaugh again. And I think that speaks to, like, yeah, there's the milk and steak thing. There, he's in his jammies at a recruit's house. There is like a weird part of Jim, but he's always kind of weirdly charming. And, like I really like Jim as a head coach in San Francisco. I thought he was underrated. I thought what he did in San Francisco, I mean, taking over for a team that was perpetually a 6-win team and taking him immediately to an NFC title game and salvaging the career of Alex Smith was incredible. So, like, there is a part of me that agrees with, even though the Browns and Chargers could face off in the playoffs next year, and they do face off in the regular season, there's a part of me that's like, oh, I don't have to dislike him the way that I dislike him when that's the other head coach in the rivalry.
I think that's probably fair. I can't think really back to hating Jim Harbaugh when he was with the 49ers. I actually thought that teams in the NFL were wrong in a way. First of all, I thought the 49ers were kind of wrong in the way that they drove him out of there, but it did kind of sound like, and this just kind of feels like par for the course with Harbaugh, although he's leaving Michigan, it seems like on better terms with his players and things like that. But it always kind of seemed like up until that point, wherever he left, it was just kind of this, okay, he's run his course. It's time to move on. Players and staff can only tolerate Jim Harbaugh for so long, but he goes out as a national champion. So clearly something was still working, and he then had all the power to kind of do what he wanted at Michigan if he had stayed. But yeah, like I thought that the 49ers were stupid for running him out for those reasons, because I thought he was a really good coach. I know we always like to talk about how with the Browns connection, there was apparently a trade in place to acquire him at one point towards the end of his time in San Francisco. So I think we would have loved it if he came and coached the Cleveland Browns and they had success because of it. Like nobody would have been mad or hating Jim Harbaugh then. So I've really only hated him the last 9 years because he coached for that team. Like that was the main reason. So I think there's probably some truth to the idea that, yeah, if he goes, now that he's going back to the NFL, not that you'll necessarily be rah rooting for him, but you're not going to be as bothered by the sight of him on the sidelines or his comments that he makes. And like, to be honest, like Jim Harbaugh, he didn't even really start to bother me in Michigan all that much until he said the third base thing. That was the first time where it was like, okay, this is on now. It's going to be like that. Okay. And then it's kind of slowly progressed from there. And then this year was like the most ridiculous stuff where it was, oh, we should be America's team because, we got in trouble or we got caught doing something that you weren't supposed to do. Like, yeah, okay, buddy. But
you know what though, real quick, I think it's so funny. I saw Bro Bible write a story on it. I saw because he made some comments to Angelique. I cannot remember her last name. She's one of the big beat reporters up in Ann Arbor, where he was talking about how how innocent they were, and people still every time he says they're innocent, people eat it up like absolute just goobers, as if on the way out he's going to be like, by the way, Oz guilty. Ha ha. Suck it, NCAA.
I
Like
honestly,
that's not really how people do things, okay? They don't admit guilt even if after they've left.
I'm gonna be honest though. If he did that, I would probably admire him even more. Because it would be such like a, you know what? You're right. We did cheat, and you know what? I got away with it, and now I'm gonna run off to the NFL and avoid all punishment. I
So
wouldn't even care.
he would nuke the Michigan program in the process, but you would like him a little bit more because it would be
Yeah.
funny. Is that what
It would be funny and it would be
hilarious.
honest. It would be funny and it would be honest, and I'd be like, I'm all for it. I love it.
This does leave us with the take that annoys me from Ohio State fans, and it's not across the board.
which is
Oh, thank God he's gone. Oh, we have a chance again. Like, I'm sorry, guys.
I actually think there's been a worse response. Like, I think that, I don't know if it was after they heard your rant on the subject or what, but after you ranted about Ohio State fans crying about the cheating scandal, I feel like that whole thing died down because we had to get to a point where we had to just admit, like, listen, guys, they went and won the national championship after all this stuff was revealed and was out. You just got to tip your cap and say they were the better team. Okay. And all of a sudden, all those people were right back out of the woodwork. I saw all these people who had like these graphics made that were like 9 years at Michigan, and it was like loss, vacated or forfeited, vacated, suspended. It was like all these people were trying to rub in the fact that the wins are going to get vacated, and it was like, dude, we're still trying this. We're still going with the vacated wins thing. That's where we're at. So I actually thought that was the more annoying response from a lot of Ohio State fans rather than hallelujah, he's gone.
No, blind hubris is exactly what we should do. When people responded, "Oh, we have a chance again," it's like you have no idea. Like, listen, there are people who remember the days that I remember, which is Lloyd Carr kicking your ass up until Jim Tressel showed up in Columbus. So there are people who do remember. I'm not the only person, but there's a small segment of fans who don't remember what it was like for anything other than Ohio State beating that Michigan ass. And they've turned the last 3 years into a 20-year run by Michigan. And it's like, no, listen, kudos to Michigan. You've won 3 straight years. And whereas last year or 2 years ago, you had the silver lining of how far you pushed Georgia in the first round of the playoffs. This year, I mean, they not only beat you there at home by 6 points, but then they went to the Big Ten title game. They got one of the 4 spots, and you stayed at home and lost to Missouri in the Cotton Bowl. But like, there is a part of me where like it's not going to be the same when you beat Sherrone Moore, and it doesn't mean that it's not going to be fun. But like, to me, this is another feather in the cap of Ryan Day haters who they're going to be able to use that. If let's say you beat Michigan next year, they're going to move the goalpost of, okay, now did you win a national championship? And if you don't, and even if you do, they're going to say, well, okay, but you beat Michigan with Sherrone Moore, not Jim Harbaugh. And I just, as a competitor, I wanted to beat Jim once, one more time before he's shown the door. I hate being the guy on the other side where the narrative is, hey, he finally figured out how to beat you. He did it the last 3 times, and then he pieced out to the NFL with a national championship ring. There's a part of that as a fan bugs the living crap out of me.
That's annoying, and I listen. I'm with you. Like it's the old, to be the best, you got to beat the best, right? Like you want to be the coach or the team that's able to get one over on Jim Harbaugh again, or get back to winning against him and prove that it wasn't just, it was just 3 years that they had a really good team and you can get back and get back at them. I get that. I also think though too, what has made me sort of, I guess, find solace in in him moving on and not being able to beat him next year and it being now a Sherrone Moore led team is the idea that this is exactly how it played out with Michigan, right? Like it's a role reversal, and we hate to be on the other side of that and be in this role. But by all accounts, like, we spent the last couple weeks talking about all the decisions that have kind of been made since Michigan won, and the players that they brought in, the coaches that they brought in, all this different stuff. Like, it's triggered this new life into the rivalry and this new life into Ohio State. Like, I don't want to call it a passing of the baton per se, which by the way, there was a clip over the weekend. They were over analyzing this. I saw somewhere. Jim Harbaugh was at like some pro-life event speaking, and somebody interviewed him about like, oh, how are you getting ready for next season? And he used the phrase, yeah, there's like a passing of the torch, and everyone was like, oh, so he's definitely leaving then. And it was like overanalyzed. I think what he meant more was like, I talked about this on the last episode, but I think it was more like a passing of the torch for the guys that are leaving the program, but it is kind of ironic that now he is leaving. Anyway, it's just kind of like that natural progression of the rivalry though, where it's like, okay, you had Michigan's number for all these years with Urban Meyer. They had no answers. They stuck with him. And then Urban Meyer left and he finally figured it out. Now the same thing is being so to me, like, it's not something that you can throw back in my face like, oh, well, you didn't beat him when it was Jim Harbaugh, because we said the same thing about Urban Meyer. And did it matter? Was anybody caring that Jim Harbaugh didn't beat Urban Meyer for 5 straight years when they were hosting a national championship a couple weeks ago? Nobody gave 2 shits. So it's the same sort of thing. If Ohio State goes to win the national championship next year, I'm not going to give a rip that we get to sit here and say, like, well, let's put an asterisk on it because you didn't actually beat Jim Harbaugh. Like, bullshit. They won the game. It's the same exact thing. Nobody cares how you get there. It's just about getting there. Or they should, at least.
I would like to point out that it's very funny that the Cold War from Ohio State side of thing, I mean, there is all this money that they pumped into getting guys who are draft eligible back. They put all this money into the portal. They made sure they spent much of December recruiting and keeping Jeremiah Smith and Houston and all these guys locked in to Columbus instead of preparing for the Cotton Bowl. And then it's like if you're preparing for a Cold War with Russia, and then it's like, oh, by the way, your next opponent is Turkmenistan. Like we're like you're about to walk in to Columbus next year against Michigan, losing like 40 guys from their roster. They're replacing the quarterback. I know that they're bringing back the defense, but Jesse Minter's probably going to the NFL with Jim Harbaugh, and you're going to roll in with an army, and it's going to be like one guy with a BB gun saying, hey, don't you do it. I'm going to get you because I'm Michigan now. And you're like, wait. I specifically spent all this money to beat the ass of Russia.
Well, I mean, if they still beat their ass, it'll still be whatever. I don't know. Listen, I 100% understand what you're saying. And this is kind of, it goes back to the conversation we had a couple episodes ago about, does it lessen the win if it's not against Jim Harbaugh? There's some fans that feel that way, and they will no matter what. But to me, it just speaks to this kind of life cycle of the rivalry that we've now seen play out in real time, where Urban had Harbaugh's number, Harbaugh had Day's number, and now Day better be able to prove that he's got Sherrone Moore's number, and maybe whoever comes after that as a head coach, if he does, because otherwise he's going to be looking for a job himself next year. So I don't know. I think that we've gotten the rivalry to a place where it's healthy again. It's competitive between both teams, and I can't really ask for much more. We kind of wanted this in some ways. I'm not saying we wanted to see Michigan win a championship, but we always said, like, at some point they got to get back into this thing. And we used to have conversations about, was it still a rivalry when we're kicking their ass every year? Ha ha ha. Now we can't do that anymore. So I don't know. I think it's just all kind of part of the life cycle of this thing. And again, I think the pressure is still there for Ryan Day to prove it, because he knows if he does it next year and he does lose to Sherrone Moore, technically is for a second time because he coached this year's team against them, then it's going to be a different conversation for sure.
All right, guys, we are going to pass the torch to Sherrone Moore. We also have to pass the torch in the Big Ten, but how do you feel now that Jim Harbaugh is no longer at Ohio State? Leave the comments in the section on 92 Through the Fans YouTube channel, or at Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito _ on X. But first, a word from our sponsors. All right, guys, we are back, and we are now talking about the state of the Big Ten. You had one more thought, though, you wanted to get to on Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL.
Yeah, because like the idea that Ohio State fans especially, are still pointing at this whole cheating thing and, oh, well, Michigan's going to get punished or whatever. I just want to say I found it interesting because there was reports early on in this Connor Stalions process that Jim Harbaugh wouldn't be able to find refuge in the NFL if he left, and I haven't heard a peep about that since this whole interview process started. Since he's been hired for several days now, I haven't heard anything about it either. So like that, I think that was just bullshit from the beginning. And I honestly think it's fine that he should be able to find refuge in the NFL. Why should the NFL have any reason to suspend Jim Harbaugh for something stupid that happened in college? Like especially something that like they have no jurisdiction over. Everybody knows that the NCAA is a house of cards anyway, and they don't really rule with an iron fist whatsoever. It's all just BS. Like it made no sense to me that if he went to the NFL, they'd find a way to like back channel, oh, you're suspended for X amount of games because the NCAA said so. Like, no, I understand that people think like the NFL enjoys the fact that they have a free minor league system that feeds into them. So they're not going to do anything to ruffle those feathers. But guys, if they found out that they could put games on Saturdays during the fall and the peak of college football season, and it would be, if they really wanted to, they could compete with college football and it would still do numbers. Like they don't give a shit about anybody. I don't care what anybody says. It's the NFL. They just don't.
Very much a potty mouth in this show. That's three three S's for you, young man. It's a Friday night. I'll let it slide, but easy up on that. What my ultimate goal is? I think it'd be the funniest troll move in history if Jim Harbaugh hired Connor Stalions as one of his scouts. I think it would be so funny because all the pious beat writers in college who, I mean, the Greg Doyles of the world who cry tears and it's cheating, and they use heavy-handed language, and it's just a bunch of crap. I don't care about it. That's not why they won the national championship. I think it'd be friggin' hilarious. I almost fell to your level there with the potty mouth. I think it'd be funny as hell if Connor Stalions was one of the newest Chargers scouts this year.
If he was, how many NFL teams like are double, triple checking him through security every time he comes? They're like, hey,
no, it's legal now.
Sure. That's true. John Harbaugh did say that. Did you see that clip a couple weeks ago?
Yep.
They were like, oh yeah, they were talking about the weather in Kansas City. He was like, yeah, we got some scouts going to that game to video stuff, and he's like, which is legal, by the way, in the NFL. Oh, my God.
So this now leads us with what I think is a pretty interesting question. And we're going to get to the Sherrone Moore stuff in a minute. But with Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL, is Ryan Day the best football coach in the Big Ten? And remember, this now includes UCLA, USC, Washington, and Oregon, just for what it's worth.
Man, yeah, it's a good. The bringing up the other coaches or the other teams that are joining is I think important. I don't know if I'm willing to say, I honestly think it might be Dan Lanning, if I'm being 100% honest. Mm-hmm. And there's a reason Bama wanted him. He, I think, is at the forefront of this movement that Ohio State is now sort of finally diving in the deep end with of the NIL stuff and trying to retain players through paying them, even though it was so frowned upon for so many years and not the way to do things, right? I think I honestly think it might be Dan Lanning. I'm trying to kind of go through them all in my head and think through who else would be up there. I think Ryan Day is up there.
How about this? How about I go through every coach and you just give me a yes or no with a little explanation on whether that coach is better than Ryan Day.
I mean, I'm already going to say no on James Franklin.
Wait, no, don't you do that. Let me.
Okay.
All right, we're going to start at Illinois. Brett Bielema, better or worse than Ryan Day?
No, worse.
That's not an answer. Yeah,
I'm sorry, worse.
No, that's not how questions work. Yeah, I would agree. All right, this one I actually think is fun, so simply because he had such success at the level he had. Curt Cignetti at Indiana.
I see where you're going with that. I'm not willing to say he's better than Ryan Day at this point, just because Ryan Day's resume speaks for itself. I mean, he's beaten all these other teams except Michigan the last couple of years. And I think he's done some nice things at Indiana, but I'm not willing to put him ahead of Ryan Day.
I think Cignetti's going to be fun at Indiana. I don't know he's going to win enough to do what everybody wants, to cause a kind of havoc that you could, but I think it's going to be fun. But I think Ryan Day's better, by the way. So that's 2-0 is what I was trying to say. Kirk Ferentz at Iowa. Is he a better coach?
maybe a better defensive coach. I'll give him that. I mean,
I think we've reached a point where Kirk Ferentz is actually incredibly underrated. But there's no way he's not better than Ryan Day.
No,
Ryan has had more success in his 4 or 5 years than Kirk has in his
here's what I'll say.
4 years.
Here's what I'll say. Kirk Ferentz is better at getting more out of less than what Ryan Day is. Like Ryan Day to this point, in the shadow of the born on third base comments from Jim Harbaugh from 7 years ago, he has had everything under the sun, all the resources, all the weaponry, all the great talent to do what he's done. And Kirk Ferentz just flat out hasn't. And he continues to find ways to win games he shouldn't and get his team to the Big Ten championship game somehow, some of the worst Big Ten championship games we've ever seen. But he finds a way to do it. So I'll give him credit for that.
You ready for a tough? So this is you're still going to say Ryan Day, but he actually has a case to be one of the more respected coaches in the Big Ten. Mike Locksley of Maryland.
I like Locksley.
He's won 23 games in 3 years. That's pretty impressive at Maryland.
Yeah. I think he feels like the right guy for that program. And he's given some teams some tests, Ohio State included, in recent years since he's been there. So yeah, I think he feels like the right fit for that program. I don't know if I'm one to say he's better than Ryan Day.
Jonathan Smith, the newly minted coach of Michigan State.
Jury's still out, I guess.
Yeah. Well, my big thing with that is,
where was he again?
He was at Oregon State.
That's right.
And so I think he's a nice coach, but I think it's going to be an uphill climb there at Michigan State.
Yeah, I completely, honestly, I have.
You forgot about him?
I forgot about him because Michigan State is just like not even registering in my mind at this point, because they reached the lowest of lows, or after they put Hitler on their scoreboard this year, that I'm kind of like, they still exist, huh? They're still a school up there in
Germany will attest. It's tough to come back from Hitler. Yes. All right. It takes a long time to rebuild after that. PJ Fleck at Minnesota. Is Ryan Day a better coach?
Yeah, PJ's like one of those raw. Like I think that's the thing that Fleck does better than Ryan Day. He has like the raw stuff down. Like that video of Ryan Day kind of getting into the center of that circle and like riling the guys up. Like it just looked so. It just looked so like fake, and it just didn't. It was very cringy. But PJ Fleck, like him doing something like that, you'd feel like he's the row the boat guy, and he's out there with these team slogans and all this. So I think he does that maybe better than Ryan Day, but I don't think he's a better coach.
I think PJ Fleck's a knob. Moving on, Nebraska's Matt Rule. Is Ryan Day a better head coach?
So that's an interesting one, because I do think Matt Rule is actually a really good coach, and we're gonna get a chance to see him with like a legitimate quarterback now, because. Yes. Raiola did go there. I know it was like between him and Georgia, and he ended up going there. That's why Kyle McCord didn't go there. So with a legitimate quarterback, I'm actually kind of nervous about them in the Big Ten in the next couple of years if Rule can really ramp up his recruiting and bring in some good guys around him. But I think Matt Rule is actually a good coach. You actually probably have a better read on Matt Rule even than I do, having covered him during his Carolina Panthers days. But I mean, the fact that he rose as quickly as he did from Baylor, got the job in the NFL, I think speaks to him as a coach in general.
I think Matt Rule is a tremendous program builder.
Yeah.
I think he had no place in the NFL. That's root for him at Nebraska, but he's not better. He has not proven he's a better coach right now than Ryan Day is. He's a proven program builder. Yeah. He's not better than Ryan. He hasn't been in the playoffs. Like his team's success have come right before he jumped to another job. He peaked Temple right before heading off to Baylor. He peaked Baylor right before heading off for Carolina. So I think this Nebraska job will go a long way into proving he's either a great college coach or just a really good program builder that gets places. And then, he's a 5 to 7 year guy and then on to the next school. David Braun at Northwestern, that's a 1 year deal. That's tough to say. So we'll put him. James Franklin. Is James Franklin a better head coach?
Well, real
than Ryan
quick,
Day.
going back to Northwestern, what's interesting is if Pat Fitzgerald was still there, which we don't need to get into all that, but that would actually be closer than I think people realize. Pat Fitzgerald has always gotten a lot of praise from his players. And Justin Fields even talked about it. Like Justin Fields almost went to Northwestern because he wasn't highly recruited for a while coming out of high school. And Northwestern was like the one team that was kind of like looking at him. And so once he kind of got more names linked to him, it was over. But I think Pat Fitzgerald was actually a really good.
I think Pat Fitzgerald is Kirk Ferentz in a purple smock.
I guess I'm starting to regret this because I have to realize that I have to come to terms with the fact that being a good head coach also means that you don't have going on in your program what was going on in your program. Yeah. And that wasn't great. So never mind. I take it all back.
It's probably a smart call by you. Good, quick retraction.
Erase that entire part of the section.
Don't run from it. Is James Franklin a better coach than Ryan Day?
No. Well, all you have to do is throw out the record against Ohio State and Michigan in big games. Like Ryan Day does what James Franklin does in like every big moment in like against Michigan. That's basically what it is. Like Ryan Day becomes James Franklin against Michigan, but James Franklin is James Franklin every single game. That's
you want to hear this? This is James Franklin's record at Penn State. 88-39. Can you believe that? Like that is not. No.
Somehow he was in the running for the Alabama job, though.
Hey, listen. Yeah, it's called his agent. Purdue's Ryan Walters. He's only had one season on the job in any capacity. That's not. Greg Schiano at Rutgers.
I think Greg Schiano is another one like Kirk Ferentz who is really good at getting a lot out of less, and I think he would be better. I think he's better than Ryan Day is. But I think overall, like from a schematic standpoint and all that, I would probably still lean Ryan Day.
All right. This one would have been really tough about a decade ago. Chip Kelly at UCLA.
Oh, shit.
There's a fourth shit.
These new teams. Well, and also I think wasn't there reports this week that Chip Kelly might get a look for an NFL gig?
I think that is exactly what it might be. But I think he'll stay. I think he's got one more year, but he's got to win big this next year. He's not. I'll just tell you, he's not.
He's not. But it is interesting because we know like what his offensive scheme used to be in the college level was like. He changed the game, right? It was like all this hurry up stuff, and it was a lot of the stuff that Nick Saban rallied against. He hated like the pick plays and that's pass interference, and then he sort of started to embrace it. But like he changed college football in a lot of ways in terms of the way the offenses were run. So it's crazy to think however long ago we would have thought differently about that. But yeah, right now I'm not willing to say that. No.
All right. Now is when, okay, I'm going to give you one more before we get to the tough ones. Jed Fish at Washington. No, it's not.
No,
Ryan Day's a better coach. Jed's had 3 years at Arizona.
If it was still Kalen DeBoer, I think it'd be worth debating.
I think it'd be a real conversation with Kalen DeBoer.
Agreed.
Hence why he got the Alabama gig.
Right. But I think we need to see more before we can say that.
All right. I don't know you, being the Ohio State homer you are ready for this one, but I'm going to give it to you.
I think I know where you're going, and I'm ready.
Luke Fickell, Wisconsin.
What's funny about this, and I sent you this the other night, is that Pete Thamel put out all the names of coaches that could be linked to the Michigan job, and I had to laugh at the mention of Luke Fickell on that list because, man, you talk about things that you like real trolling opportunities. Like Luke Fickell, if he actually had a chance to go to Michigan, like would he take that job just to get back at Ohio State for not giving him the job full time, however many years ago? And I mean, it's his alma mater. It always sounds like he has eyes on maybe getting back at some point, but that would be like the greatest pathway would just be like, I'm going to go to Michigan and beat them up. And then they're going to be like, hey, you actually want to come back and flip the script here a little bit? So I thought that would have been hilarious. I think Luke Fickell is a great coach. I think that he also is you have to be a good recruiter to do what he did at Cincinnati and bring in the players that he brought in. So I think he has a really good eye for talent, which is something that I think puts him on par with Ryan Day. I'd like to see at a bigger program him like Wisconsin, him continue to have success before I think I put him over Ryan Day. But I think like between him, Day, and Lanning, I think those three are kind of near the top for me, where it's wanting to see a little bit more from Fickell before I put him above those two guys. But I think like he's in the conversation.
I think this year is a big year for Luke. He's not Wisconsin born and bred, so the pressure on him is going to be. They were 7-6 last year. He's got to win 10 games this year to keep himself on solid footing. It's tough to be an outsider in a place like Wisconsin. All right, here the last two ones. One you've already mentioned, but I do want to get to. I think some people would put Lincoln Riley over Ryan Day. I disagree. Lincoln has had a lot of success. He has taken,
With quarterbacks.
What'd you say?
With quarterbacks in particular.
Yes. Well, but I mean, remember he was in the playoffs, I think twice with Oklahoma.
Yeah.
That's tough to do. I mean, even though it was at a time where Texas was taking a step back. What I will say is he has been an abject disappointment in Southern California. I still think he can coach, but like the bar has changed, and I just think like this is a dude that went 55-10 in 5 years at Oklahoma. He's already 19-8 in 2 years. He already has almost as many losses in 2 years at USC as he did at Oklahoma. I'll take Ryan Day over Lincoln Riley right now.
Did he make a mistake going to US, like leaving Oklahoma?
I mean, it got 10 years, $110 million. They bought his old house in Oklahoma, and they bought him a new house in California.
Okay, aside from like a job standpoint, though, like did he like because I wouldn't have thought like there's pressure at Oklahoma, but I feel like at USC they're in that same sort of territory that Texas was for a long time, where it was we think that this is the guy who's going to bring us back to prominence, right? And every year you think like, oh, USC's back. They just said they had Caleb Williams this past year coming off a Heisman season. This was supposed to be the year that they got everything back on track after Pete Carroll. And ever since Pete Carroll, they just haven't been the same. So I don't know. Like it seems like there's more pressure there. I would also think like maybe I would imagine he has more resources there because it's USC and LA and the glitz and glamour and all this stuff. But it just seems like other than the fact that he produces some of the best quarterbacks coming out of college every year that are top draft picks, I don't know if I feel like he's like I think he's kind of fallen flat in terms of what the expectations were for him for sure.
You want a hot one? I think Ryan Day is who Lincoln Riley was through 4 years at Oklahoma. He's made the playoffs, but hasn't won a national championship. He's had some success against your biggest rival, but not consistent. And, Lincoln went 12-2, 12-2, 12-2, 9-2. And then that last season went 10-2. And that was, you could just feel, it's not that people at Oklahoma didn't like him, but you could just sense that the pressure was building to do something bigger than end up a 2-loss team. I think that Ryan Day is in about year 4 at Oklahoma of he's where Lincoln was going into that last year, where after that 5th year, Lincoln said, oh, I might want to go ahead and take the money and run. Everybody assumes that Ryan's going to get fired this next year if he doesn't beat Michigan. He might beat Michigan but lose in the playoffs, and that might grease the skids for him to kind of land another job to say, well, I beat Michigan, and now I'm going to go out like – I think Ryan Day is now on a Lincoln Riley trajectory, which is why this year is so important to get not just a win against Michigan, but a win, potentially a national championship win to just silence all the doubters. But I would still say I think Ryan is above Lincoln.
I think I agree. I do agree. Sorry, I just be more firm about it, I guess. I also like. Here's the other thing. I know I don't mean to just go back and use this as like the simple, I guess, explanation for why I think Ryan Day is a good coach. I don't want to simplify it down to just like one game necessarily, but I do look back and see what Ryan Day did in that Georgia game in the playoff last year. And that was one of the best games that Ryan Day's called in his career. And I just felt like he put up a better fight than I think we've seen Lincoln Riley teams do over the years. There was the one year they got boat raced by LSU. And I understand that LSU team, we all look back and say it might have been the greatest college football team ever. So I get that. He did put up a fight against in an Orange Bowl, I remember in 2018, it was like a 10-point game by the end against Bama, but even that, and then
Wasn't
he
that
went
the
to
Baker year? Oh, no.
yeah.
No, it was because 2018 is when Baker got drafted.
Yeah. And then 2017, they lost to Georgia in the Rose Bowl in a game that went to double overtime, but that wasn't the same Georgia now. Like, I just want to know how he would do against some of these other top programs. And I think we kind of saw that this past year in the Pac-12. He got out coached by Kalen DeBoer and Washington. Boat race that maybe not boat race then, but I remember it was a high scoring game. And then they lost to Oregon. Like, I think that there's coaches who have proven that they've passed Lincoln Riley. I don't know that he is it's one of those he's not who we thought they were type things, because I agree with you. Like, here's what I think Ohio State fans think Ryan Day is at Ohio State right now.
So I do think that I'm going to save the Sherrone Moore one till the Michigan panic meter, which will be in the next segment. But I do think with Dan Lanning, I think it's a conversation. The reason why I would still take Ryan Day over Dan Lanning is just the amount of success and the fact that
the resumes. Yeah.
Dan's been the head coach at Oregon for 2 years. I think he's going to make that one of the toughest teams to beat in the Big Ten. And I think Ohio State fans should start to fear Oregon because they're one of the few teams with the ponies to go up against you. That being said, he's 22-5 in 2 years. This was arguably his best team, and he lost to Washington twice. So I think Ryan, here's the reason why.
If he builds a legitimate defense, because that was always the knock in the Pac-12, right? Like, they didn't play defense, whatever. If he builds a legitimate defense, I think maybe that goes differently, and maybe we're having a conversation here. I think you have to do that in the Big Ten. Like, that's the difference. So we'll find out about that. If you were putting gun to my head today, if you asked me who would you rather have, I might actually say Dan Lanning, because I just think he's at the forefront of this movement and he really gets it. I think he'd buy into a lot of the history between Ohio State and Michigan and all these different things, maybe more so than Ryan Day has kind of done. So I might take Dan Lanning gun to my head right now, but that could also change, next week. So I think it's pretty close between those two.
I think you're crazy. I think you're absolutely right now, today. It could absolutely change this fall. But I think to say after everything Ryan's done, because you got to understand, it's not just about win-loss record. It's about recruiting. It's about putting guys into the NFL. It is about, being in a position to be in the playoffs, which Ryan has done half the time he's been a head coach. And albeit, he's been to one national title game and he lost that Georgia game as well. But he's had 2 of the 4 best teams in college football, 2 of the 4 years he's been the head coach. And I just think recruiting, top notch, putting dudes in the NFL, top notch, 3 quarterbacks, top 15 picks in 4 years. 5 years. I don't know what more you could ask from Ryan Day other than just beat Michigan and win a national championship. And nobody else has the resume or recruiting or putting dudes in the NFL. Fickle doesn't have it yet. Dan Lanning doesn't have it yet. Hell, even Kalen DeBoer didn't have it yet. And I think Kalen's a freak of a coach. Lincoln's got some of that, but a lot of that was at Oklahoma. So I just think I think it's okay for Ohio State fans to realize with Jim Harbaugh going off to the NFL, I think Ryan Day is the toast of the town here, even if we still have questions about him.
I think that he should be. I definitely think going into next year, without Jim Harbaugh, out of the picture, he has to believe and he has to think and he has to prove that he should be the guy proving that he is the best coach in this league. 100%. He has no excuse anymore. He has this loaded roster for next year. If he loses to Dan Lanning next year, because I know Oregon's the one new team that's on the schedule for Ohio State next year, then yeah, maybe we're having a different conversation and we do change and we're changing the answer here. And maybe you're coming my direction more saying Dan Lanning. I don't know. But I think, yes, on paper, face value going into next year, there's no reason to believe that Ryan Day shouldn't be at that level and be the toast of the town, as you put it. I just I think that given how the last couple of years have gone, he's got to now sort of reaffirm that going into next year.
So with that, we did save one name. The name is Sherrone Moore. He's the new head coach at Michigan. We're going to have that debate next. Is Sherrone Moore, because he's beaten Ryan Day, does that make him the better head coach than Ryan Day? The Michigan panic meter, and we'll wrap it up. But first, a word from our sponsors. right, guys. Now we have saved one name for this topic here, which is Sherrone Moore going to be considered a better head coach running in his first full year as Wolverines head coach than Ryan Day is? Before we get to that, it is time for us to get to our Michigan panic meter. And for any of those Michigan fans, as a reminder, it's not whether Michigan is panicking. We're judging our own panic.
Although this might be the week to change it
flip
and
it.
say, is Michigan now panicking because they lost Jim Harbaugh? That'd be interesting.
But the problem is the lightest level of panic maize or blue, and then is the heaviest level of panic maize or blue?
I think the heaviest level of panic would have to be maize, because that's more of like a bright, like panicked color, and it sort of incites anger inside you versus, well, I mean, it's maize and blue. Who likes those color schemes? Anyway, versus the blue is more like, okay, it's subtle. It's a little more cool.
See, I was thinking more like yellow is sunshine and it's bright and it's happy, and blue is dark and it's moody, and it's funny how we arrived at very opposite conclusions there. But
remember that thing a couple years, or not a couple years ago, like over a decade ago now, the dress, was it blue or was it black? What color did you see?
I don't remember. You know why?
Okay.
Because it was 5 years ago, and I can't
was
remember
more than
last
that.
Tuesday. Now, when we get to my Michigan panic meter, I am full gray. I have no panic. Jim Harbaugh is gone. You've got the team of the century. You've got the alleged $13 million team, according to Lane Kiffin. I mean, I don't have a care in the mother-loving world right now when it comes to Michigan. How about you, Spencer?
Am I going to join Nick?
I'm telling you, you damn well better. If you're
gray.
still in any level of light gray, I will judge the shit out of you.
I'm going to be in the dark gray. Let's go.
Look at that. Finally.
Yeah, I said on Tuesday, I promised. I said there was a couple things that would sway me into the full dark gray. One of them was getting to the spring game and sort of getting a chance to see Will Howard in action with this offense, with this team. The other thing was if Jim Harbaugh leaves. And I added that at the end because it kind of hit me like, you know what? By the time we do the next show, this might be a thing, and I might have to actually just go into the full gray. So, yeah, I'm there. Even though that sounds like I'm celebrating Jim Harbaugh leaving, I know that you don't like that. I'm in the full gray.
So that brings us to Sherrone Moore. And I will get to the Sherrone Moore versus Ryan Day because I want to make fun of that in a minute. Here's what I can tell you. I think Michigan did the obvious thing to maintain continuity going from Jim Harbaugh to Sherrone Moore. And I think Sherrone Moore has a chance. But I think the difference in the two programs is what could be the difference in a successful handoff from Harbaugh to Sherrone Moore and from Urban to Ryan Day. I think they're still going to be really good under Sherrone Moore because they're, returning a lot of that defense. I think whoever ends up being the quarterback is going to be an interesting player. But remember, they're still replacing the head coach. They're full-blown orgy in Ann Arbor, as we all know. But you're going to be replacing an offensive coordinator.
They're getting more orgy. Nobody ever said no to more orgy, right?
Every joke that I could make now is going to get me in trouble. So I just think, I think it's the right hire. I just would also say I don't think Michigan fans are looking at this and seeing the risk in it. And I do think there's a significant risk because as good as Michigan's been, they don't have the natural resources that Ohio State does. And I think that makes keeping it at this level while handing a program off just a little bit tougher.
Well, first of all, let me be the first to say, Sherrone Moore kind of born on third base, no? I mean, he's taking over a program that just won a national championship. Is it this sort of just history repeating itself, but now it's his turn? I think so.
I got to say that to my buddy Jim Costa, who's a Michigan guy at 97, won the ticket in Detroit. And oh my God, he didn't like it. It was so awesome.
Well, now I'm glad I said it because now we're gonna get so many hateful comments now. Oh, this guy bringing up born on third base.
Keep him in.
Yeah,
keep him in.
I'm gonna say it loud and clear for you. Sherrone Moore has officially been born on third base, and frankly, He was born on third base when he coached that game against Ohio State back in November. He was taking the reins of maybe the best Michigan team ever, but if not, at least everyone kept saying that J.J. McCarthy was the best Michigan quarterback ever. So I think there's a conversation there. And the first team to win a national championship in over 30 years, like the guy clearly was given a golden ticket, and now he's going to get to keep that golden ticket for longer because they're segueing to him now as the head coach. So yeah, I think it's fair to say that he was born on third base, just like I agreed that Ryan Day was born on third base and Urban Meyer took the program over looking back. So
just what I want to say real quick, it's a lot easier to come in as an interim head coach where you're not the guy making every decision every moment of the day than when you are the guy. And again, this doesn't mean Sherrone can't do it. All right. What he did beating Ohio State as an interim head coach 4 games into his interim career, because remember, he was one of the 3 first games, he was an interim. And then obviously the last 3 game suspension, he was the interim the full time. But it's just a lot different when not to go full Hugh Jackson, when you move your ass 18 inches to the left and now you're at the head of the table, it's a completely different thing. So I think Michigan fans are taking for granted that Sherrone's just going to step in. I think it's going to be a really difficult transition. I think there's a lot of turnover at Michigan.
Yeah.
I think he can do it, but I'll be interested to see how long the good graces of that national title last. Whether I'll be interested to see that reaction when he loses this November to Ryan Day. I'll be interested to see if what the reaction is if he doesn't make the playoffs this year, and then going into year 2, because it's not Harbaugh as the head coach. When you have a head coach that's won a national championship, your championship afterglow is 2 to 3 seasons after, unless they're just a complete jabroni like Ed Ogeron. Like Jim Harbaugh could have coasted another 10 years off one championship at Michigan. When you're the guy who was his offensive coordinator, who had a part in it, but maybe you were still just a guy in the cog in the machine, the patience isn't going to be anywhere near. And now the bar is win national championships and beat Ohio State. So anything that is under that bar, if you go back to winning 10 games a year, which was the previous standard under Jim Harbaugh, and the high water mark with Rich Rod and I think Brady Hoke, okay, good luck. Good luck, because that you're going to go from the anointed one to why aren't you winning national championships inside 3 years, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's history repeating itself, only reversed, because Ryan Day was the same thing, right? Like, he was taking over the program from Urban Meyer, who won a national championship and was constantly beating Michigan and all these different things. And so that's why, to your point, Ohio State fans have treated the last 3 years like it's been a 20-year losing streak to Michigan, because they haven't been used to this and they've only seen wins against Michigan for quite some time. And it's not as easy once you're the guy at the top calling all the shots. So I think you're 100% right. There will be some growing pains, I think, for Sherrone Moore. I don't think it's going to be so easy. You can give him credit, and I do want to give him some credit, because I know Zach Zinter, the offensive lineman for Michigan who got hurt in the Ohio State game, he mentioned that it was an easy segue to, he called him, I think, Papa Moore. And clearly he has a nice rapport with some of the guys in that locker room, and it seems like the team wanted it that way. I give him credit for building a really good offensive line consistently, because that team's always had a good offensive line. It seems like the last 3 years that they've been in contention. And I think that he seems to at least have some relationships that are important. I also think, too, to your point on sort of doing the sort of path of least resistance here, you're sort of late in the hiring cycle at this point. And I don't know if it made sense because I don't know if it made sense for Michigan to really shake things up and bring somebody else in here who's going to change the culture immensely for a team that just won a national championship. You know what I'm saying? You kind of want to keep some of that in place, and you kind of don't want to ruffle all the feathers. Obviously, no matter what, there was going to be a 30-day window where you could transfer. That always happens when a coach leaves. But at least this way, it sort of smooths things over, where it's less guys are probably more inept to leaving, because they're well, it's still Sherrone Moore. It's going to be a similar culture, all these different things, rather than a completely new coach comes in and he's we're doing this thing my way. If you don't want, Dion showing up and he's I'm coming, I'm bringing my bags, and they're Louis. Like it's different. So I can understand why they chose this route, but I think you're right. Like it's not just going to be as cut and dry as people, especially Michigan fans, might think it's going to be. Yeah, and so I don't know. I'm interested to see. And listen, he can have credit for beating Ryan Day this year in that game specifically. But I also just think that team at that point was already accustomed to not having Jim Harbaugh on the sidelines. Like it kind of proved that they were, I don't want to say like completely bulletproof, but the fact that they go win a national championship, given all the adversity that they had, it was just a really good team. So, and Ryan Day had a team that was probably in a down cycle in terms of his offensive talent, not all of it, but especially at quarterback and offensive line. So he gets that back on track. Like I have no reason to believe that Ryan Day won't get back to beating Sherrone Moore, and that Sherrone Moore is going to have to go through some of those growing pains too.
I do want to see, because that transfer portal opens up, I am curious if any Wolverines players go in it that had not previously gone in it. Just even one or two guys would be interesting. But all this being said, I think there are a lot of Ohio State or the Michigan fans flexing, well, we got Sherrone Moore. Well, he just beat Ohio State. And I'll tell you this right now. Sherrone Moore has to prove he's the better head coach than Ryan Day. And you don't do that as an interim coach. Interim coaches, it means nothing. Now becomes the time that he sculpts us into the image of Sherrone Moore.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of Michigan fans, and rightfully so. They won the Natty. Like they're going to rest on their laurels. They're going to sit on their throne. Good luck with that and see where it goes. We'll talk in a year's time.
Well, yeah, and I again, I keep saying history repeating itself, but I think the Ohio State fans probably felt similarly when Ryan Day took over. There's probably some questions, I think, from Ohio State fans, like, is this really the answer? But once you got that first recruiting class coming in and you barely missed a beat, it was like, oh, okay, he's going to keep it rolling. That's what we thought. And obviously that first year he was on the job, he beat Michigan. So it was like, okay, cool. So I guess my question in all this, you mentioned it not really mattering when you're an interim, and I agree. Like, there's a lot more pressures that come with it. There's a lot more things on your mind. There's a lot more things to deal with. It's different when you're the guy. How much credit does he get then for beating Ohio State? Because that's the other thing people are forgetting is like they probably, I don't know if people think this, but it's not like Sherrone Moore was just on his own coming up with the game plans. Like during that suspension, Jim Harbaugh still coached the team. Like they knew what they were doing going in. Now he had to make critical decisions when that game got tight in certain spots, and yeah, he deserves some credit for that. But I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh yeah, he schemed up the game and he knew everything that was going to happen, and he had all the answers. Like I can't give him credit for all that.
Does anybody really think Sherrone Moore didn't know what the right decisions were? Come on. Like those decisions were probably, I mean, there was probably a lot of prep about here's how I want the game to go. Here's how I think we have to win. So no, he didn't get any credit. He'll get credit when it's his team and he beats him. And if that happens in November, there might be a different coach across the sidelines. But if he loses, the pressure's going to start real quick there. So send in your responses.
I just want to know, after he gets his first win, is he going to that's for you. That's for you, Jim.
This one's for me. It was so hard taking over. This one's for me. Old crybaby Sherrone. That dude will whoop my ass.
Wait. Talking a little smart. We didn't even bring that up though. We didn't even like that. That's gonna haunt him now forever. Like you talk about pressures of like taking over this job. Everywhere he goes, like if he doesn't win, it's just going to be endless memes of him crying on social media, and everyone's going to send them to him in his phone. Oh my God, he's never going to live that down ever. He's never going to live it down.
If game days in Columbus next year, I better see countless avatars of him crying. Yeah. Oh my God, that would just be beautiful. All right, guys, get on the show at Nick Wilson Says at Spencito _ on the social medias. Continue to follow the show. If you don't follow the show wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, Stitcher doesn't exist anymore, but if it did, you could follow us there. Of course, Odyssey, the free Odyssey app, and of course, 92.3 The Fan's YouTube channel and 92.3thefan.com. We are Sons of the Shoe. We'll be back next week with the latest on this rivalry, the latest on Michigan moving on from Jim Harbaugh, the latest in Ohio State. Could we have another coach hiring? Could we have another name in the transfer portal? You'll have to find out. Until then, guys, peace. Go Bucks.